Hello and welcome to the DM's Book Club, a weekly podcast where each episode we take a look at some Dungeons and Dragons and how you can use it in your role-playing campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
As ever, our overlord and superhost Fiona is with me.
Superhost. Thank you. Thank you, co-host Halton. Sorry, I was like running from my head going trying to think of a good title, but then I was like, if I say title, it'll probably sound really mean by accident. So I was like, no, co-host is fine.
No, we'll keep him in his place.
Keep him in his place. Ego's so big anyway.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, exactly. You've just come back from Gen Con.
I have, yes, indeed. The Nevada for many geeks who decide Indianapolis is good enough to go to.
The Nevada?
No, Nevada.
Oh, Nirvana. Nevada,
yeah, so,
paradise.
Sorry. I'm so tired. Yes.
It's like the paradise of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Indianapolis. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it was very good, as I was saying to you off podcast. Like, very much enjoyed it. Very overwhelming. It was very interesting to actually go to a con, which definitely puts RPGs at the forefront. Like definitely felt like there was so much you could do, and it wasn't just the typical, buy some dice stall or here's some dice jewelry. There was actually there was Modifius there was Cubicle 7, there was Free League, but it felt big. It felt like proper, like people wanted to be there, and along with side like Warhammer mini games, Lorcana, Magic, D&D obviously had a big presence there, and there's just so much to do. That's the thing. It was like I barely scratched the surface. I didn't see any live shows or do any panels or anything like that. I didn't even play in any games, so I was running a couple of games, but I just was like, no, this time I don't need to go into it. I will say though, their website is terrible. You can't find any fucking thing on that website.
To be honest, I am still yet to find a good con website. So show me the one that is good.
Once you worked your way around, actually knowing where things were in the convention was fine. But was there any signage? No. No, of course not. Well, I mean, they had big banners saying, go to booth whatever. And you're like, cool, where is booth whatever?
Yeah.
Once you had to figure like, this hotel is for panels. You'd go in and there'd be a couple of signs, but it definitely felt like a choose your own adventure kind of thing. And you're like, well,
that was UK Games Expo with panels. It's like, it's
the
in
Platinum
this weird...
Suites.
Platinum Suites, this alternate dimension that is hidden behind.
Nobody fucking knows where it is or goes to. It's.
I didn't mention it. One of the main doors was hidden behind a big sign saying "this way" to something else.
My god, that's bad, isn't it?
Yeah, but I did think the floor signage at UK Games Expo is really easy because it's like it's got a very good logic to it. Like you know you're going east and north, and it kind of grid system works quite well.
That's quite smart. Yeah, because we had a similar thing where you had banners that said like the numbers would be like 100, 200, etc. And then in front of the stalls, it would give them the stall number. So Rowan Rook and the Cards one, for example, was 455. And of course you'd be like, okay, so that's 455. And what I learned, as always now, was rather go, I will come back to the stall later. You'll never find it. If you take a picture of that number and a little bit of the, I'm just taking pictures on my phone now, but because we were spread out over two bits, we were 455 and then 1929, which is like part of a slightly bigger move. I was like, look for the 1900 and then look for this particular thing. So it was once you got that in your head, it was fine. But of course, the Gen Con guide was just half of it was full of ads.
Well, I mean, that's what they're there for, isn't it?
It is, but it kind of, I don't know. I must say, Gen Con must make an absolute killing for Indianapolis in terms of like bringing tourism in, hotels, all that sort of thing. And then, just on top of it, it definitely made money, and it definitely took a lot of money from me as well. But one thing I'd say, which made me laugh, so one of the hotels, I think I was telling you, was that it's called the Crown Plaza Hotel, which is like a repurposed train station. It was very interesting because when you go in, because it was a little bit further away, 5 minutes walk through a skywalk, you could find seats. You didn't have to sit on the floor. There was water fountains with ice in it. And the best part, I didn't tell you this, right? Where I went and I sat down and stuff, I was next to the trains group. So obviously people had brought trains to play, but that meant the female toilets next to them was completely free. No women were in that group, so I got to, no queue. I could rejig myself and change my outfit, and I wasn't rushed. It was honestly possibly the best found I ever. It was just a female toilet that was not. There was no queue or anything.
Finding the best toilet. I remember that toilet we found at MCM. It was secret toilet upstairs, and you're just like, I can go to the secret toilet. It's so good.
It was great.
When you find the secret toilets at cons, you feel like an absolute genius, because it's It's the best thing.
Honestly, I kept coming back to that hotel, even though it was like, okay, it's like a 5-10 minute walk.
Yeah.
Just about I could sit down, be on my phone, rejig everything in my bag, because I have a bag to go around. Like actually sit on the chair. That's the thing I really hate at cons, and I haven't again. I don't think there's an easy fix, but there's always so many people just sat on the floor or lying on the floor because they're exhausted. They've done themselves out. But I'm just there going like, don't do that. There must be somewhere you can sit, and I feel like where MCM is obviously it's in the Excel Centre, UK Games Expo, the Birmingham stuff. There's never enough chairs. There's never enough places for people to sit because people are older and stuff like that. But so people are on the floor. And I hate it. But this hotel, nobody blinked an eye. And I just sat there because obviously I looked like a Congo. I had my card and everything and I sat next to loads of people who were just like rejigging or on their phone and you were down like side corridors with these chairs and stuff. Again, it looked a bit like The Shining, obviously, with the aforementioned white statues that were pretending to get on trains and stuff.
You said about these.
Horrific, scary. But I put up with that. Maybe they were the ones that were scaring other people off. I don't know. So
you found your home. Just amongst the creepiness.
Fiona never left. Fiona's still there. Anyway, enough about Gen Con because it's fun for me to talk about, but I appreciate if people weren't there, they're like, all right, Fiona, shut up about that one time you went to Gen Con. What are we talking about today? What is our topic of choice, Hamilton?
We're on is it the third episode now? I'm looking at the Eberron rising from the last war. I feel this probably is this going to be the last thing we look at this book?
I think so. I mean, there are other bits to it. Like I will say the big chapter 4 talks about how do you do adventures and Eberron and stuff like that, which is something we could look at another time. But I think to round off, we can look at Sharn for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sharn, the City of Towers, is the sort of a big poster picture for it. It's the water deep. It's that's pretty bit unfair because people probably think Baldur's Gate or Neverwinter, but
it's not necessarily the capital of Eberron. Like it's not the capital city of Corvair or anything like that, or Breland even. But it is like the one that should start in it. So it's got the most fleshed out bit of it. Certainly, obviously in this book.
I think we called it last year. It's like New York. It's like it's not the capital, but it's definitely the one everyone thinks of as like the key city of like commerce and stuff like that. The artwork, as we've mentioned many times in this thing, is absolutely on point. It's just it's gorgeous artwork, and to describe it to the listeners, it's very much like have in your mind Coruscant, Blade Runner's LA. It's that sort of like huge towers, big screens that are displaying images.
I love that advertising. I'd never even considered like advertising, like obviously other than canvas stuff, like it's magically done as it's demonstrated here. It doesn't really mention it in the text too much, but I do love that idea of like that bit in Piccadilly Circus, with the Eros fountain and stuff, and then that sort of big screen of advertising. Yeah,
very much like that. And then the ships are very spelljammery, they're kind of like galleon-esque but with these wings. It's very beautiful artwork. I think this illusory dragon roars, it says, as flying ships zoom on skyscrapers of Sharn at night. And there's some other fantastic pieces of artwork. So yeah, totally worth it for that. The map, as I've mentioned off podcast, is a little bit, it's a little bit of a downer. So I'd kind of just not look at it because it kind of ruins the idea of it.
It helped me figure out the wards sort of thing, because I feel like the language around it. So just to clarify, so there's a map in it which currently on the Indie Beyond, it doesn't have a credit to it, to be fair, and it just shows the sort of layers of it. So it starts off with the lava pools, goes to the cogs, so that really underneath foundations of Sharn, lower city, middle city, upper city, and then Skyway. So those are sort of like the different sort of levels, and then in that there are like 5 different, what are they called? Like sort of quarters, essentially. And so therefore you have 15 wards, which is like, say, the lower part of Dura, for example, or the middle part of the central plateau, etc. And then not all of them are interconnected to each other. Again, imagine like there are bridges, and I just imagine lots of construction and how you get across things. It always constantly changes, constantly bustling, etc. So for me, it helped me realize like, when we're talking about, say, Tavik's Landing, Upper Tavik's Landing, that's a particular place that you have to buy a license to have weaponry and spell casting. So I know where that is in the grand scheme of things. But I do agree, it looks like, looking at this particular map, it looks a bit dated and doesn't really fit, as you were saying, with the theme of this sort of weird sort of sci-fi heist noir type, like again, what it's been presented. So I agree, it feels more fantasy.
It's the weirdness of having the gap. It's this depth thing as well, kind of feels really off because it seems like so tight and constricted.
Yes.
And then it seems really weird that it then has a gap in the middle. That just feels a bit weird to me. And the art direction of those towers just looks very much more like medieval towers.
Yeah, it looks very fantasy and
very fantasy, whilst the other one is photos of very like sci-fi meets planescape meets fantasy in a really interesting way.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a hodgepodge of stuff, and I know as you're an architect, you're like, it could be better. Like I agree. I feel like the way it's sort of, it's not like futuristic, the setting at all, but it is magic is everywhere. Technology has advanced so much. So maybe that's the thing. Maybe technology, because it's advanced so much in the last, like at least 4 years or so, or at least since the start of the war, maybe that's what it's, they're just juxtaposing the old and the new, but you'd still would expect some sort of thing to see at this map, perhaps. So I agree with you about that.
Either way, it's a very cool idea of a city. And I think it's kind of like, how do you move into it? The history of the city is quite tailed, because it originates from I believe it was a goblin city which I think is Jura itself, is the heart of it. And it was like an ancient sort of like settlement that slowly, during the sort of big transition of when humanity moved into Corvair, sort of started to develop this into this large city, and it grew out of that. And the old city is still like in the base, in the depths of it, but and you can still see remnants of it, but everything's just been built up and up.
It makes me think of stuff like older cities. So obviously Bath would be one, but like Edinburgh, this idea of everything's just building on top of Edinburgh, and everything's tightly packed together. Certainly if you're at the Fringe just now, I'm sure you're experiencing the ridiculously cobbled streets. So I just imagine Edinburgh on that big sort of Royal Mile.
Well, Edinburgh's very much like that, because it's the city was built to become like, they have like what some of the first skyscrapers in the world were built there because of the nature of the rock, and the fact that you couldn't build towards the river, which is now a park on the other side, and everything was in this small Royal Mile, that it is so tall. And there's a good word for you: palimpsest. Palimpsest. It's a layering over of new layers of architecture on top of each other.
I love that.
The original term is for writing on old parchment. So it's palimpsest. So there's a famous, we used to learn it in the architecture school, because there's a famous chapel you can go to in Rome, which has got a Roman temple, which is then built on top by a medieval church, was then built on top by a Baroque church. And you literally just go down the building and you can see the 3 layers of architecture. And it's literally just like, it's incredible. It's really
interesting.
Great.
Yeah. And like you said, it comes out from this, one of the quarters of Dura, and then it's just sort of built up around it as and when it can do. And I love this idea. Again, like you can see the sort of history shown from before the war. So again, we've talked about this before, about whether or not you want to play in Eberron, and it having to, where do you place the story? Because in this particular book that we're looking at, the Rising from the Last War, that is obviously set 2 years since the Treaty of Thronehold has been signed. And so obviously there's tensions and all that sort of thing. But it sounds like, again, because there's just so, let's face it, this particular chapter on Sharn, just similar to the previous chapter on the lands, we only did the 5 main ones. There is so much content here, and same with Sharn as well. So it does feel like you have a wealth of knowledge equipped to be like, okay, do you want to play it just before you go to war, maybe during, because there's obviously one of the places there was an attack, and now that particular district has completely been decimated and changed. So maybe you want to, similar to your Morttime actual play, do a similar thing where like the attack has just happened or is about to happen, like being sensitive with that sort of stuff, because I appreciate obviously right now in the UK there's lots of things going on. I just think that is we have so much information here that I do think is quite accessible, and it's an easy way. Like, I wouldn't feel too bad about giving this chapter, as big and as dense as it is, to players without changing too much.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you could work in all 3 of those settings, that before, during, and after, I think would work really well. As it mentions, Sharn was never really a part of a major attack, so it could be, if you wanted to play that sort of more like during the war, but the sort of like when America, you see those TV shows that are set in America during the war, and they've got this weird tension of like there is a war happening elsewhere, but life still kind of goes on, but how does it affect? And you could play it in that sort of way if you wanted to sort of investigate, sort of have it as a refuge amongst the war. If you were playing that sort of campaign, I could see that working quite well. And actually then you could play on those themes of like the complacency that can come from that safety, and then oh dear, something actually happens that's actually quite, and then reminds everyone and sort of shakes these people. Maybe you've been to war and you come back and like these people are just working like every day and it's kind of weird until something happens. I don't know. There's something you could there's a lot of themes that it could build up around that. Again, as we always have to say, because of the war theme, it's obviously a subject that's ongoing.
Yeah, I can't imagine having playing a game of Eberron. I know we've said this before. Playing a game of Eberron where you would fully remove the aspect of war, because again, it is my favorite thing in the world is political intrigue, and there's so many ways for you to do so. Like we said that's previously, like the idea of patrons, that you're spies or you're working for royalty or anything like that. And certainly here, I mean, looking at right at the end, the forces of law and the criminal activities, that gives you so many examples of things to do. Like we've talked about the Boromore Dragonmarked house, that is basically the mafia of this world. It controls everything, but also is protected in some way. We have Dask, which is another sort of criminal mastermind from Drome, so the monster sort of creatures sort of thing, which is quite cool. And then House Tarkana, which is the other. That's the Dragonmarked house, which is the aberrant Dragonmarks. So it didn't get a big mention in the big Dragonmarked house thing, but that is also seen as a criminal activities thing, which I don't know if you would necessarily do that. I wonder if you maybe would change that narrative a little bit, because for me, it indicates that anyone that has an unrecognized Dragonmark is criminal.
I think you could just still have them as just another band of mercenary thieves who call themselves a house as a sort of like... that sort of false nobility. There was a character that was in another thing, which was a false noble. Like they sort of, it was in Ravnica, isn't it? There's one of the leaders of one of the sort of criminal gangs, I believe, calls themselves like Lady something, but she's not a lady at all. She's not got any high station, but just acts like a lady, and then goes around in society and acts like that, but really is just this. Is it from that? I can't remember where I've remembered this from.
I love the idea of it, though. Like, I can imagine the head of the guild is just like a constant imposter syndrome, like, oh.
Well, they just constantly push it on people to just, I'm a lady, but everyone knows they're not actually got that noble blood, but they play it up and sit around in high society, and everyone sort of accepts it because they've got all the goss.
Oh, I see. It's almost like a Lady Whistledown effect, so to speak. If someone claims to be Lady Whistledown, then they suddenly have a lot of power, even though they might not be Lady Whistledown.
That's exactly, yeah.
That's how I have to put these things into my world. I'm like, Bridgerton.
Speaking of Bridgerton. Yeah.
The other one that's mentioned briefly is this idea of the tyrants, which is forgers and grifters.
Yes.
It specializes in deception and the acquisition of information. So another group necessarily you could do. So those four, and then the forces of law, like the Sharn's Watch, the King's Citadel, which has multiple, we talked about the King's Lanterns, I think, very briefly in one of the episodes, Dark Lanterns, Shield, Swords. So there's different departments, the King's Citadel, so that's one up on the watch. And then if things go really bad, you get the Red Cloaks battalion in, so like the proper TA of a lot as well. So you have all these initial factions about law and order. When we've talked about this before in Breland, this idea of like there is ultimate order, but everything's fine, but if you act out of line, you disappear. That's sort of again, so we have this sort of balance and sort of like tension, I guess, between criminal and law in one city. We've got plenty of factions in that sort of thing. Yeah,
it sets it up really well, and I think that's what it's a very good example of like how to set out a very cohesive and very detailed and good amount of table rolling here for a city guide. I think it's very good. It's actually surprisingly condensed. It's big. I'm not saying it's not a small chapter,
no.
But it's comparative to some other ones that I feel we've looked at. It definitely flowed well. Maybe that's all it was, but it didn't feel like there was anything that was superfluous, and everything it had, but without it, and it didn't feel like it wasn't too short either. I think it's a very good example of that.
Because the last primer we looked at, I believe, was the Baldur's Gate primer from Descent into Avernus, and both of us were like, not as good, because it didn't excite us. And to be fair, we'd read that the Waterdeep one, which had a voice of it, and there's no voice here. But I agree. I think maybe what made made it sort of more interesting.
It's quite dry, I guess you're right, but it is
dry, but I think what broke it up quite a bit, which Baldur's Gate did not have, and I know this is maybe a special thing of the Eberron source books, is the little newspaper clippings and the headlines and stuff. Like that always interests them. Like, oh, here's a little snippet of like what the taste of like the news is like, and again, it feeds into that idea of a spinning newspaper like missing errors.
Very much. And I think also the tables broke it up a bit. I think that's kind of what I liked about it, because you could read the sort of important information, you could then skim the tables and then find something that was interesting within those that you liked. Yes. And it felt very like, if I was a DM, I felt very good at like being able to manage what I'm trying to find, because I'm not there's a lot of different types of formatting. I know this is probably like a really weird thing to talk about, but it's kind of key for a book club to mention that, like, actually props for the sort of like, I'm reading this book through or scrolling through on D&D Beyond. I'm like, okay, Central Plateau. I've got this bit which is just in black and white, the basic text, and then here's like important districts within the Central Plateau, and it's got them going light grey, dark grey, light grey, dark grey, light grey, dark grey, and I can easily see what's what. Skip down. All right. Oh yes, here's one that's called kitchen. Yes, I'm looking for something about food in the lower central. And it's kind of like really simple to navigate.
I agree. I think that's the only thing I would add with the difference, because for each of the 5 quarters, as you said, you have like certain locations that could stand out and could be like a place where your characters would meet or go to. I think the only thing I would do is maybe have a table that says what's a speciality, like you said, food or messaging service or something like that. Just again, because that could be like, oh well, we want to go shopping, we want to buy fabrics and clothes. You're like, okay. No, you just try to like tavern. There's always taverns and stuff, If
you look at them, it's the first part of the sentence does normally say like a temple, an institution,
an
tavern,
auction house, etc.
Yes, but I totally agree. That would be such a good addition.
What I do when I make my notes, I copy everything, put it into a Notion, and then I make my notes from that. But then in my head, if I was doing this, I'd be like, right, add another column, add those in, just for that sake. The other thing I'd say, which I don't believe we had in Baldur's Gate, but we did have in Waterdeep with the primer, was the holidays.
Yes.
There are less holidays, thank God, because there was a load of holidays in Waterdeep, I'll be honest.
There was a lot here to be still.
There's 14 in total, but I want to say, one that is definitely not a holiday, but I like the fact it was included, was the Tane Gala. So that's basically one of the dragon houses every month holds a big like gala, and all the people, the movers and shakers are invited to it, and it's in the Skyway one of the Skyway mansions. So I'm saying, I like that it's not like a one-off event, that constantly happens, so that maybe, oh God, all right, let's pull a short, whoever gets a short straw has to go to the ball. Oh, no, not me again. So it's like you don't want to go and schmooze. But I like the fact that it was the first far of each month, it says, so the first, presumably, like, I can't remember, I think that's like Tuesday or something like that. But also it talked about the day of mourning as well. We've got a date for the day of mourning, and Crystal Fall, so that tower that we talked about, that the one that fell, that's also put in here as well. So they're not holidays, there's almost like remembrances and stuff as well, whereas I always felt like holidays to me were always like festivals or a city-wide event of that of joyous things. I guess it's nice to have that, hey, we do need to have some sort of remembrance day for these things that terrible that have passed. And like the Thronehold holiday as well, they're saying like, hey, this is the second time it's been celebrated that we've had this peace, the writing of the peace treaty and stuff. And so it's a very tenuous holiday as a result. And so I'm like, oh, that's quite interesting as well. Like a brand new, today is a bank holiday because we signed this treaty 2 years ago. Yeah,
it does give a lot of flavour to the space, doesn't it? And like the things that they find important, like, and a lot of it does relate, as you said, to the war. Like you've got not only the day of mourning and the Crystal, but you've also got the Sun's Blessing, which is a day of peace.
I love this one.
When enemies are urged to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict. So, it kind of picks up. It's like picked up in so many other ones. And you've got Bright Blade, which is very much the classic, like, festival is of prize fights, wrestling matches, archery contests. One of my favourites is the Race of the Eight Winds.
I was going to say, was it this aerial race that takes around the Dura Quarter? Again, instantly, that's pod racing. That's literally what I was thinking.
That's pod racing, yeah. And there's some really good games. There's a whole section on like sports and games next as well, which is literally after that. And it has like Harazak, which is a shifters game of sports game with ball game that's played particularly in that area. And there's a Hazarak Arena.
It's like a mixture of capture the flag, but also I feel like tag rugby and all these things about getting getting the other person's idol and putting it in your own goal.
Yeah.
I don't think we've had sports as part of a cultural thing in the other primers that we've looked at.
I couldn't think of anything.
No, I know, and like you mentioned that one. We've got Skyblades, which is like a very typical aerial jousting thing. But then I love Six Stones. I love this awful game.
Surprisingly, Fiona loves the awful game. They're literally the not far off being a saw apart.
And again, so this comes from Drome as well, and it's this idea: you have 7 competitors, and it's the last person standing. They're sealed in a large chamber with a cockatrice, and the match ends when 6 players have been turned to stone. At which point, the survivor is awarded all the stakes. And the Medusa handler helps with all the things. So again, I like the fact that you've got sort of typically monstrous people helping out and being like something. But I just love that idea that you're in pitch black, you're going to get jump scared, and you turn into stone by the cockatrice, and but it's seen as an underground illegal activity. But oh my god, to watch that, you're betting on your friends and you're watching it going, ooh, don't go there. It's one of those things where instantly I was like, how could I make this into a proper game and have some sort of way for the player in it not knowing what was coming, but everyone else could see it and try and help them, either telepathically go, oh, close your eyes, or I don't know, you know what I mean? Everything about it, I was like, this was a fun game. And Six Stones, it sounds innocent enough, right? It's Six Stones.
It does. I thought this sounds interesting, and I was like, oh, this is fucking terrifying. What is this? Yeah.
It made me think about what sports would I put in a city or a world that I was building. Because again, I recently did the world building thing on Where, and we talked about, culture and the food, etc., like that, religion, all that sort of thing. And then it didn't really talk about any specific sports or something like that. And I do wonder if people go, oh, I don't want to come up with all the rules to that sort of thing.
Well, that's true.
I mean, fairly straightforward, these rules. You could just build it up and then make it up as you go along. As long as your players... I think is that as soon as you mention to players, oh, there's some sports, they go, well, I want in. Yeah. You might need to think of stuff. But I just love the idea of maybe I could invent some sports that my players might want to take part. It's coming up with the mini games when you're doing Turn of Fortune's Wheel, or the anything. Then you're doing little mini games, little heists, little gambling casino games, like in the Vecna one, where they went to when you go to some layer of Avernus to see Tiamat. In Tiamat sort of
the casino.
That's it, the casino there. Yeah, sorry, there's too many casinos. We've had 2 casinos and as many books. So
2 Avernus casinos that as well.
Oh, and there's one in the Golden Vault.
That's what I was thinking of. Sorry, Which one's the other?
No, sorry, 3.
Where's the third one? Wait, there's the one in
the Golden Vault. Yeah. There's one Turn of Fortune's Wheel is all casinos.
That's the third. That's
and then the one in Vecna as well. Yeah. So we've got loads of casinos.
Casinos coming out of their eyeballs. So probably what happens in the Six Stones. People eyeballs coming out. I can imagine. It's awful. Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's an interesting piece of culture that is kind of overlooked a lot. You're right. I'm trying to think if it's mentioned in the University one. I can't remember.
I can't think of it off the top of my head. Like you said, they had loads of different holidays, which I think were mostly celebratory. It's the passing of Midsummer and all that sort of maybe a bit more traditional, like our world sort of thing.
You can just imagine, because just taking from that a little bit, there's going to be a famous Skyblader, because there are, particularly for that race of the 8 wins. Each district has its own champion, and they've all got these particular characteristics that they give them, which I think is quite cool. You've got this idea that one of them's an owl that races, and there's one that's an animated gargoyle that flies for them, and it's kind of sounds so cool. Really, I love it,
and especially because flying is a way to get around this place. So it talks about in great detail, if you want to get from one ward to another, crossing one ward is about 30 minutes, and then getting up is another 30 minutes. So if you were going to say the lowest Dura ward all the way up to say the highest bit of the main plateau, that could take you a couple of hours, because there's lots of bridges and stuff. You maybe have to take the long way around because maybe not a direct route. But you can, it talks about this idea of flying surfaces and being able to pay for hippogriffs to help you get up to these places. Expensive, but if you need to get there in a hurry, maybe you have an important message or you have to beat someone else getting to the same place. I also quite liked how it said, like, look, there's plenty of bridges and stuff like that, but if you fall, there's several ways to deal with it. This idea that you have a feather token as insurance, that you hold onto it and you will just fall to the next one. But also, you probably won't fall too far because you're just going to hit a bridge. Or there'll be a random table that a friendly wizard gives you a spell and then now wants payment. I quite enjoy just imagining like a big bustling city, just like loads of people like walking, like, hey, I'm walking here, and then you push someone, they go, wah! And then they're okay. They think they're flying, and then someone else go, oh, that's another 2 silver, thank you very much, pay up. You know?
Yes, payment after the fact, because it says like some areas people walk around either with the tokens in it, which like if you fall, it starts to automatically do the featherfall one, but some bridges also do it the minute you fall off the edges. But some of them don't, and there's a horrible story in it about someone who falls down on someone else, and it doesn't go very well.
Oh yeah,
yeah. It's good because it just kind of goes onto those little minutiae of things as well, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah,
which is kind of nice.
Minutiae, I think that you and I find interesting. It's not. It's something that we go, oh, we actually probably would use that. I think sometimes when we've looked at stuff and gone, no, who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares about certain things? Like he talks about, the usual of like communication services. Like again, we've talked about it previously. Like one of the houses is responsible for like teleportation, all that sort of thing. Spellcasting services as well.
Shopping centers.
Yeah, absolutely. Healing. Yeah. So it's just recapping all those things. So all the chapters we read so far, I think they've been put in a certain order, which I don't think makes sense for me, because like we started off with talking about like, I guess it talks about the bigger world and stuff, but then it talked about dragonmarked houses specifically, and I feel that should have been maybe a bit later because I had all those questions about it. But I think the continents maybe come first, or maybe even Sharn comes first, then the continents, then the dragonmarked. I don't know.
Agree.
I think it's done enough. It doesn't repeat itself too much in terms of like, hey, this is it. Oh, but you've already covered it, or you can find it more in chapter whatever.
Yes. I agree. You could argue that potentially the way that it's organised in this chapter, particularly in itself, kind of flips about, but it does do it in a way that, I don't know. The only thing I think that repeats itself is it does the wards of Sharn, and it goes through, and then it has like important districts within the areas. So it then gives you all the districts for that. And then you go to each of the different quarters, and then it gives you places within those quarters that are important, like noteworthy locations. I think could just merge the two together. You don't have to do it like it kind of does a little bit too much. Big scale, medium scale, tiny scale. And actually sometimes you could just go, this is Jura, this is North Edge, and expand them into those a little bit better.
Yeah, we talked about this before with Travel Book Club as well, when there's all those minutiae sort of planes and stuff that had a lot of stuff, and you're like, actually, this could have easily been in air. This could have been in water.
Yes.
As just, it's 2 pages, but like add it to the thing, so it doesn't feel like, oh, why would we come here? There's nothing here. Whereas if you add it to something it's on the cusp of, you're like, oh,
yes,
well then we can do more to it. So yeah, I agree. The important districts, again, helpful in a sense if you're looking for stuff, but at the same time, I would have that column of tags, and B, I just, like you said, put them into the actual section. It says, Central Plateau, Memphis Plateau, all that sort of thing.
So the districts then themselves, I think, as you said, so there's Central Plateau, which is the heart of the sort of what would you call it, governmental, or the sort of like
power and wealth,
administration sort of, exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then Jura, which is the sort of old city.
Old town is what I thought,
Which has got like places like the Overlook, which is this really cool shrine devoted to Path of Light. You've got the Bazaar, which you can just kind of imagine this sort of amazing sort of like jumble of buildings where you go shopping. It's a bit less like looked after, and it's also the area where the Fallen is, this area that got destroyed after the floating tower crashed into it. So it's definitely got this old centre. And they've got Memphis, which is this sort of everyone sort of residential district. It feels like it's sort of like a middle land of everything.
Yeah, it's sort of in the centre, and it's like the entertainment industry and where the university is. So again, I think of it as student town.
Oh yes, that's it. Yes.
Yeah. No, I think you're thinking of North Edge.
I'm getting mixed up with North Edge. That's it. Yes.
Because again, there's so much. It makes total sense, and they're quite close to each other as well. But yeah, Memphis is this, and like, what I love about again, another shout out to like just in general the way this is laid out. Like obviously, as you said, upper, middle, lower, like giving a little bit of information about each individual district. But then it goes, what things to do, and it goes, like in Memphis, for example, it's like go into show business, see other cultures, join an expedition, and then there's a random table in there going like, what's on the bill, and you just roll to see what play may be on. So again, I like that. I love that's the minutia that I really love. I love saying like what kind of play it is, and like for example, they have The Late Count, which is a comedic opera by the bard Kessler, revolving around the Karnaf, a count who is resurrected as a zombie. So again, with all this talk about like the undead that we had previously, I can imagine it could be a hoot, but there could also be people who are outraged by this sort of terrible, like, in poor taste, etc.
Oh yeah.
So I like the idea. That again is something I'd be like, I want to make up more shows that are like evocative of the time of maybe again because I'm thinking that it's the Fringe now, so I'm thinking maybe they'll have like a big Fringe festival going on, and so you can just roll if you were going to the Fringe, if you got any of those flyers, you could like get them all out and then change the names ever so slightly and then put them into like a table, a D8 table, to be like, special one-off shows, it's free Fringe in Memphis, the Memphis Fringe, what have we got going on, like a one-woman show about her past. Ooh, one of that's going to be, look, it's a D&D show of some sort, that sort of meta on meta, I guess.
Yeah, where they're playing Houses and Humans.
Oh, Houses and Humans, yeah. Officers and Bosses.
Officers and Bosses.
That's from Magic Tavern. But yeah, it's a similar sort of thing. Yeah, it'd have to be something and something, like Dungeons and Demigorgons or something like that.
Those are really fun, and actually those bits, these things to do, is a really good place to go. Weirdly, is at the end of all of these, after you've got this sort of like notebook.
Again, I would move them up in the thing to be like, here's something, because then you'd be like, right, I need to look at these, because again, I do think it's quite tricky when you've got so many like notable locations in each one, and you in the districts and stuff. And it just, I don't mind it at all. But I think just in terms of the layout, just be like, okay, what is the Mentis Plateau? I'm like, entertainment, but then what else can I do in that? I think just I have all that information at the top, and then random tables at the bottom where people can go and look for them.
North Edge is the one that I always is the one that makes me think of Fiona, because it has like the 3 things it says to do in North Edge, like compared to these other ones where it's like become famous, or the other one like find somewhere to settle down. Here in North Edge, it is actually settle down, find a place to live.
Oh yeah,
die in style.
Yeah, I know.
And find a patron. I just love it. It's like
those 3 things.
3 things. Settle down, find a patron, then die in style.
Die in style. Well, that's the thing, because that's interesting, the die in style one, because it talks about this idea of having experts from of these particular kinds of elves from a different region, who are experts in funerals and customs and embalming. So again, that's something I hadn't really thought of. I'm like, that could be really interesting to like your mission is like, I need you to take my husband to his final resting place. So you're having to take this weekend at Bernie's style into someone and like make sure they get to the appointment on time, all that sort of thing.
I love that.
Something I would not have thought of in a campaign to like as something of interest. And like I said, I know I keep going on about it, but instantly I'm like, okay, we could have the high stakes, grand heist adventure, you jumping from bridge to bridge, following someone like intrigue, but also you could be like, okay, it's a bit of downtime. Do you want to go look at houses? Do you want to go to a show? Like I don't know. You know what it feels like? It feels like a GTA game where you could go and do all the mission stuff, but then you'd be like, all right, I think I'll just have a drive out. I'll go home. Happens, yeah. So I'm a big fan of those games where like Red Dead Redemption is another one for that, where you go, I could do the missions, but what if I spent all day hunting?
What if I just spend my day at Transmutation, the beauty salon that uses magical and mundane cosmetic techniques? Like, that's kind of thing.
Love that.
It's good. And in this as well, to go along with these sort of like locations, there's a little bit more information on a couple of places we've already found. Like you mentioned the criminal activities, but there's also the places like the Deathgate Guild and the other Adventurers Guild, the Clifftop Adventurers. That's it. Yeah,
that's it. And then the Deathgates Guild is the one you were talking about. So these 2 sort of rival clubs, one being a bit more monstrous and a bit more willing to do the dirty deed, whereas it feels like the Clifftop Adventurers Guild is like, haha, good show, everyone.
Yes, jolly good show. Yeah, what a great.
Put the world to rights from our chairs and whiskies. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's what I imagine it to be.
Whilst Deathgate's Guild is like, rock and roll, right? Let's go.
Let's do this. It feels more punky for sure.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Actually, it's a good point you mentioned that. Yeah, because like the Circle of Song is this idea of bards joining together, and it's definitely more of like a free collective. Like, hey guys, just
commune.
Yeah, exactly. But what I really like it because it makes me think of where, if you didn't want to necessarily go to a tavern to get things like, information like Circle of Song would be an excellent way to hear stories or pass on stuff. Like, it's another way of getting information. So interacting with that group, that's not necessarily an adventurers guild or in a tavern. Obviously, you can like this idea of an outpost, but maybe like, oh, we don't drink, and that's cool, totally cool, and we just tell stories. And it reminds me of I never went to it in London, but I always used to listen to their podcast. There's a True Spark London, which used to just tell stories up around a certain theme. And everyone would go and people would just go up and tell their story. So that's what I imagine it to be. It's like you're all just listening to different, like a spoken word night, essentially.
That sounds really cool. Oh, yeah, like I love spoken word stuff, like from Black Flag through to Henry Rollins, who does those sort of really interesting spoken words. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and just chatting. Like, again, it's just a way to tell a story that is like a unique. It's slightly comedic, but could be quite sad. So yeah, that's how I imagine these. Just there's spoken word nights where people just talk about on a longer theme. So I think that'd be great. It's like, so what news from these other lands? It's like, well, let me tell you about the travel I had, or something like that. It'd be just really interesting. And then the other group that it mentions is part of these arcane orders, which has these two sort of split. Like an original society called the Esoteric Order of Orion, and this guide of the guild, of Starlight and Shadows. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm like, well, one of them's clearly good, or clearly ordered, and the other one is like, haha, and probably has better cloaks. And that's going to be Starlight and Shadows.
I'm so joining Starlight and Shadows. I'm not joining the boring Esoteric Order of Orion.
Well, we must operate within the confines of the law. And you're like, okay, but what if we didn't? And what if we made stuff and like break the rules and like be able to move forward? Like, so it's like, it's like sort of like tradition versus innovation. And I quite like that fact there is that sort of, again, a split, but it doesn't go into it in too much detail. It just describes like there are these two parts of this guild. But then there was this other guild, this other sort of schism called the Closed Circle, which has this thing about necromancy and transmutation. It was dabbled in forbidden law. All that
Closed Circle, it's the Illuminati. It's very much that sort of.
Love that.
Yeah, they're definitely coming back as a cult, aren't they? Doing up to no good.
They're up to no good. But again, at the same time, I like the idea that maybe it isn't, in the sense of like it could be like conspiracy, like, oh look, you turn over these books, you put them together, what do you get? 33, and how many if 33 and 3 add together is 6. What does that mean? the closed circle. I love that sort of conspiracy theory like thinking.
3 minus 3 is 0. 0 is a closed circle.
Exactly. Yes, like the infinity symbol, that's 2 closed circles, but what does it mean? In this primer, it doesn't really focus too much on like the factions or anything like that, because we've already spoke about it. So therefore, it gives you a much bigger rundown of the actual locations.
Yes.
And like you said before, like it gives you top, middle, bottom, what to do in each one of them. And I think it means then you could be like, right, let's make it really small. We could talk about the, what's it called? Like Tavik's Landing. That's where you start off. And maybe for the first couple of sessions, that's all you're in. You're just in the 3 levels of Tavik's Landing. And then maybe like, oh, you complete your mission. That's great. Well, he needs to see you. Big boss that's in the central plateau, and then slowly moving and slowly opening up the world, rather than like just dropping you in.
Very much like the bridges in GTA, as you said, like the bridges.
Pretty much, yeah. Suddenly it's like, oh, we've unlocked another part of the island. So I like how it is. It feels very modular, and that you can like I say, as soon as you open it up, and then like at some point, they'll be like, okay, now you can leave the city, and then maybe it's another adventure that you have. Along with obviously, there's 2 places that we haven't talked about. So we talked about the different sort of quarters. We've got the Central Plateau, Dura, Memphis Plateau, North Edge, and Tavik's Landing. But we also have above, we said like the Skyward. Yes. Oh, Skyway. I keep saying Skyward for some reason. It's because I'm always looking up. And that is this like idea of the really, really like top 1%, the richest people. They're in this. I can't even imagine it. Like, I just assume it's just is it a separate layer on the cloud? I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, I think it says in the section that it's on a floating, solidified cloud. Whoa. And it's home to the lavish estates and all these people at a very fancy hotel. as well.
Interesting. So you could look up and you just see the lights twinkling perhaps in the night sky, and then below you have the cogs. We sort of described it that these the foundation works, which then go into the actual dungeons of Shar as well.
Yes,
so
the cog sounds very cool.
It sounds very fun. It's
very Spire and Heart a little bit in this sense, isn't it?
You know what? I did have a think about Spire and Heart from Rowan Rook of the Card, and it does feel like that, right? The bigness, the vastness of up and down, and I can imagine what if you did have inter-district war between the two levels, and maybe that's the thing, you could close off a whole quarter perhaps because they try and contain riots.
You could use a different game system to play in this city.
That's true. It doesn't really give you, sometimes we have it with primers and stuff where it goes, oh, maybe you get a disadvantage on these checks or anything like that if you were from a different district. Not so much in this. So I agree. You probably could take the Spire resistance system and then play Eberron, play the City of Towers.
You could be playing a whole Eberron campaign using D&D and suddenly come to Sharn during the war, and you want to do this more maybe there's someone's taken over the city and the city's now being run by a tyrant that's not a part of Breland, or another faction sort of overtaking it, or it's a secret sect within the government that's taken over Sharn, and you need to, and that's why you've got this resistance movement. I don't know. It could be really interesting.
Yeah. Was there any bits for you that stood out? This is the bit that you really want to play in or use in another game at all?
You know what? I don't think there was anything particular about it. I think I liked. You mentioned the criminal activities, and I've got to say, of all the things, it wasn't the one that drew me in as much as the other parts of it, which I think a lot of the times it would be. I remember there's lots of guilds, particularly the guilds, for example, in Ravnica was something that really was I really want to get involved in those. They're so cool. But obviously, because we've already got the houses, the dragonmarked houses, that's already sort of dealt with. I just felt like a nice sandbox to be in.
I agree.
So there wasn't anything that was I really want to do anything particular in Sharn. I just want to do all the things that we've talked about already in Eberron, and I think Sharn's a great place to do it. As you said, political intrigue, fantastic. Or if you wanted to do mysteries or crime, sort of a crime novella style sort of storyline, it's a really good little place to be in. It's got a really great atmosphere, really good vibe that you could just build off and go down that sort of Blade Runner-y route and do the whole slightly neo-noir-y city story if you wanted to. And I think that's kind of that's what it gave me. I wasn't, and as a base, potentially it didn't grab me as much for weirdly, I know it's a bit of a strange thing, but it's not the one I'd be this is where I'd bring all my characters to just for the downtime.
No.
Because I think it's too big.
Way too big.
Yeah, and I feel like it's not somewhere that you would make your base unless you were really going to interact with the city. I'd rather choose some of the other locations we talked about. In my mind, I quite like that floating fortress keeps coming back to me.
Yeah.
Or I would just use the Clifftop Adventurers Guild's tower that's set on its own somewhere else. I can't remember where that was located, but there was one. They have them all over the shop. But, I'd have one of those as an outpost or something rather than Sharn, where I'm okay, I'm in Sharn. I want to do all these things. I want to go and see some sky jousting. I want to make them feel like they're really in a city and it's a special thing to do, or it's the setting of the campaign itself. What about yourself?
Yeah, and I think what I find really interesting, so obviously you mentioned Ravnica, and that felt like in order to play in that system, you had to be tied to the guilds, which didn't seem like a bad thing. That sounded like a really easy way to get into that setting. Here, we talked about the dragonmarked houses, as you said, I feel like you might not ever interact with them for at least a couple of sessions, and then about their info stuff, but you don't necessarily have to be a part of them. Even though to me, at first reading, I was oh, maybe you should be a part of them. I feel and I know I've said this before, it feels such a versatile setting, but I do wonder if you are in Sharn, would you ever leave it? Because I feel like the world is so incredible. What they built is really incredible. Yeah. But then this city of Towers, stands really well on its own. Yeah. And it reminds me of when we had Rob on to talk about Tolus, which was the idea of just this massive city that Monty Cook had written about. And didn't write really much about there was little bits of content around it, but the main aim of it is that you will always be in this city, and not as you're trapped here, but the fact there's just so much to do. And so in my head, I think if you start them off in Sharn, I don't think you'd ever leave, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I just feel like it's such a shame because I feel the rest of the world is so interesting. I would love to go to Drome or even the Antarctical places, the winter places. I don't know. It's just one of those things where it feels like you'd start here, but you wouldn't be here for one session or two. You'd be here for a full arc at least before the Clifftop adventurers go, we need you to go to the Lazar principalities, all that sort of thing. So I feel there's a lot to do it, but I think that's the thing I take away from it, is that it doesn't matter whether I start in Sharn or in Corvette or somewhere else on a different continent. There'll be stuff for me to do there. But it's one of those things where I feel like I'm spoilt for choice.
Yes.
And there is an adventure here in the book as well. I didn't get around to reading it, unfortunately, but it talks about how you would build adventures. So that's this next chapter, chapter 4. It talks about the ways you would do different adventures, different villains, like things to think about, like a lot of information, I think, for the GM to create some really fun stories. But the adventure is set in Sharn. I wonder what might have been nice is to have other adventures or proper adventure hooks, perhaps, like a 6 adventure hooks that's in each of the big cities, in each of the big countries, sorry.
Yeah.
And do that as well. I think that's the only thing, because I was like, okay, because I think I was so excited about, like, oh my god, there's so many different continents and so many different things I'd love to do. And then Sharn, I went, well, this is really interesting, but I don't know anything else about it. There's other cities, there's other places in the different continents that we looked at, and different countries that we looked at, but I don't think I could ever do something like this, which feels so easy to pick up. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to, it would be nice to have like those hooks or be like, hey, there's, I don't know, even more nuance perhaps. But perhaps it comes in the Exploring Eberron books. It comes in the other books. It's another streamlined edition. Do you see what I mean?
That's Eberron in a nutshell, isn't it? It's very sandboxy, and there could, in some ways, it's a bit of like, oh, it's everything for everyone, which is, but not in a bad way, not in the sense that like it's just one big blur of everything. It's just got, like, I just went back just quickly to look at the Corvair Gazetteer and just look at the art there again, just reminding myself, like, Arcanix is like, it's like, okay, I want to do Wizards School Adventures, Arcanix. I want to go be on this floating barge that's a fortress. I can do that and experience that in a wilderness, or I can go, and Sharn is the same. It's just another element of that, but it's your sandbox for urban adventure.
Yes, 100%. There you go. Yeah.
As you said, we've said it many times. You said it as well on, like, you'd just be like, okay, I'm going to just choose Kabara. That's what we're doing, because you don't choose Eberron. You choose a part of it. Eberron.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Sharn is just one of them, isn't it, in its own way?
Yeah. I think it'd be interesting to do like a West March campaign, and knowing, like, having groups of adventures. We talked about this before with the Vecna adventure, this idea that you're bringing like your best and your finest to this adventure. But what if, like, okay, for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be in Sharn, and that's going to be this little adventure hub. Once that's finished, we're going to move outside, and then you build up this almost like, again, this conspiracy board, and maybe you have these adventures with different groups, etc. Again, a lot of work, I'll admit, but I just, there's just something about it where I'm like, it excites me. It feels like it's very well written, very well put together idea. I just don't know where I'd start, because I feel like I'm spoiled for choice.
Yes.
But you're right. Sharn is the urban adventure, which I think is the easiest access point for most people who are coming into D&D, maybe for the first time, most like us, looking at Eberron for the first time, rather than be like, we're going to stuff you out into the wilderness, best of luck, have fun fighting the monsters in the castle, that sort of thing. So
I think that's true. And what I'm loving so much about this setting, I think comparatively, as we said, we've probably said it many times, just like comparatively to Sword Coast, where you do feel very like, okay, Waterdeep is definitely a great urban adventure place. It's really cool. But I think it's never given me this sense of all these different opportunities for stories to be told in these environments that could come from all these different, like, cultural reference points, like noir, or the sort of gold rush, or or I want to do Indiana Jones, or I want to do high fantasy wizards. I want to do secret sect sort of stuff where they're like nefarious plots and stuff, or this religion that's kind of weirdly taking over. All that stuff is just available in this, and I think it conceptually sticks to that point the whole way through.
You've hit on the point, because I realised that obviously the first 2 chapters, maybe the third chapter sets us up with this, like you said, the Corvair Gazetteer. There's like 17 different countries, and we only covered 5 of them. But already you're like, well, I feel like The players need to experience this political intrigue at some point. So whether that is visiting another one of these countries, maybe as part of an embassy sort of thing, I feel like if war is such a big thing, like, again, to be fair, it does talk about in this chapter about like, hey, there is a signs of war that has been there. There's scars on the buildings, rationing still here, all that sort of thing. So you could do that sort of wartime at home, World War II aftermath, all that sort of thing. But I wonder again, would you do that, or would you go, actually, let's get the players into the action of it and go and do this Cold War tension, which sort of comes around. Yeah. So it's interesting because I just feel like, because I love that idea of the Cold War stuff and getting them involved that way. But I guess it depends on how much the players want to be a part of that. And maybe they just want to be like, no, wartime has happened and we're experiencing the aftermath of it. And both of those kinds of stories are interesting stories. Yeah. I would love to again, I've not come across this at all in any of the books we've looked at recently.
No, so, I like that. I really, just on your point on like the Cold War one, the idea of then maybe just like picking two settings in that guise, like, and using that as like a juxtaposition of the two. So like, for example, you could start out in Sharn and it's this vibrant, bustling city where, one of the mage guilds, as it says fabulously, has a mutually uncomfortable relationship, which I think is fantastic, with the Watch.
Yes.
And so you can have this world where it's very like criminal activities are working at the same time as the Watch, and it's all very much blurring in a very urban environment of like this, as you said, like very exciting. And then you send them to Breland, where it's like everyone just disappears. If anyone goes, and you just kind of hit them with this. Yeah. And so you kind of get them comfortable with one sort of setting and then chuck them into another one, which is completely alternate to it, and see how they react to that. And that makes that other setting that makes Breland so much more interesting, because it was like you started there. It's like, oh, well, this is the story. This is the thing. This is how the world works. But, oh no, if it's more like, oh, I thought the world is Sharn, and it's really not. Like, it's really not the world you think it is. This is what it's like when you're in, New York in the war. You're now in Berlin in the Cold War. And that's a very different place. Like Berlin rules, as they say, isn't it? Like in Homeland, I always say, like, is it in that, or is it in that other terrible Jack Ryan TV show? I think it might be. But in one of those sort of like spy shows, it says like, there's a way you act when you're in Berlin rules, which is like, you don't ever trust anyone. You always check your back, and you walk through town in a different way. And then there's home rules, which is like you have to trust everyone, and it's a different way. I can't remember I'd have to find the
That's
quote.
Interesting.
But it was like you could play that whole game of like out as the spy in the field, and then back in your safe space or whatever like that.
I think, because you just hit on like a very cool memory to me. So before I left the UK, I went to go see Cabaret, that in like that immersive feeling, and it was so interesting to have the players and stuff like play. But obviously with Cabaret, the story of that, fascism is taking over, and it's all very subtle and that sort of thing. And I could just imagine doing something similar, but it is in the Methis district, and that there is something not right, and letting the players know again, as long as they're okay to just explore that sort of stuff. But again, there's so many stories out there that of that period. Obviously, there's a whole wealth of them, as you said, TV shows with Americans going, something's not right, Or even having, if you want to go really dystopia, perhaps you fall through to like another timeline, an alternate timeline, and it's very much Man in the High Castle, where the morning, I don't know, took place in Sharn, or some other, there's been a takeover with the Silver Flame, or so, anything like that.
Or the war never ended; it just stuck into a stalemate, and you're just in this stalemate situation hundreds of years later. And Breland's gone full 1984. As thought police and all that sort of stuff. Everyone disappears, even in Sharn, and Sharn is like this dead zone of activity. None of the you go to all these places, but the cultural district is all quiet. The plays are all propaganda. You could go down this whole route if you wanted to, I don't know.
You had the very much like the Fallout posters, like loose lips sink ships, but that's sort of,
exactly. The walls have ears, exactly, and stuff like that.
Keep calm and carry on,
all that stuff.
Keep Sharn and carry on, or something like that. There you go.
Keep Sharn and carry on.
Boom. Done. Episode title. Well, thank you so much, Hamilton. I think we could talk about Sharn for a while. I know we didn't really go into any details, but to me, it feels like it's given me enough to be like, oh, so this is what a good primer is without overwhelming, but there's lots of stuff there and intriguing. And I don't know. I would definitely love to play it or run something similar. I would definitely tweak a few bits and pieces, but I think it just goes to that testament of what a passionate writing team came to do this. And as you said, there was like the Exploring Eberron. There's other PDFs out there, loads of PDFs for Eberron. I think it is understandable why this setting, when it came out originally, was then one of the first settings to be put into 5e. As like remade it instantly rather than say Planescape or a Spelljammer first. Like it was like, oh well, maybe there's a mixture of like, oh well, it's one of the more recent ones in the last 20 years. But I think there's a lot of love for it. I hope other people check it out. If
I was going to make D&D, do you know what I mean? Like make it and be like, what D&D is great for, which is its adaptability into many other settings, because different types of play, because it really is just a sandboxy background for making. It's basically a combat mechanic game, really, at the basics.
Yes.
And then what that does is gives you something to create a character around, and then really the rest of the game is all about experiencing the world, because role play is one of the key tenets. And so because of that. What it should, and exploration. So it's exploration, combat, and role playing, isn't it? I think. And so like this is the ultimate of the other two tenets of it. It gives you all these different sandboxes to play in, all these different places to explore and to have amazing interactions in. And I think above and beyond the Sword Coast and that because of it. And it's not stayed and it's not outdated as much as other settings where you spend a lot more time going, not to say that it's completely without fault, but there's a lot less times in this where you're like, do you know what I mean? Like,
yes, where we go, oh no, and I was gonna say, and I really loved your idea of like what you don't have to use D&D for it. You could use Spire. I think that's such a great comparison. Would highly recommend checking out Spire. There's again a lot of lore in it, so don't worry if you get overwhelmed. But using that system, I think would work so well for this, and the same with Heart as well. If you like, because again, there's not too much on like the cogs and dungeons as sort of mention of it, but with Heart, it is all procedurally generated from the characters, and it's a bit more body horror and stuff. So easily you could just like bolt those games together. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Well, I think that kind of is a testament to the sandbox nature of it, is that it makes me think of other games to use for it. Do you know what I mean? That's what I think is quite great. I think Eberron is a fantastic setting that I would suggest use other systems for it. Kind of, do you know what I mean? Like, I think
play the setting in whatever your system of choice is.
Exactly, because I think it's that. I think it's that good a setting. Whilst I wouldn't say that so much about the other settings maybe that we've had.
No. Well, I mean, I'm thinking about it now. Maybe Ravnica could have been like Blades in the Dark type thing, perhaps.
Actually, very good shout.
But again, that's only after the fact. So I think that because again, so that's really interesting. Maybe we should do that more when we do settings. We go, what other systems could we use for this? I think that's a good discussion point, perhaps. Well, thank you so much, Hamilton. Before we sign off, our ending of our Eberron adventure for now, where can we find you and what are you up to? What projects are we coming up, my friend?
Yeah, so you can find me on the internet. I'm at the Dragon DM on Twitter, and you can find me as Fueled_Chaos or other places, and Fueled Chaos, or one word, Fueled by Chaos on YouTube, where I do my Warhammer-y stuff. I think we were extending the deadline now to like the middle of September. I started a painting and quit bashing conversion competition called Every Model is Necromunda Model. And so it's basically, the idea is you can take any model from any system apart from Necromunda itself and convert it into a model. There's random rolling tables, and there's potential prizes of £20 to spend at Element Games if you win one of the 4 categories, which is Best Individual Model, Best Gang, Best Painted, and then there's a People's Choice Award as well.
Oh, look at that. Amazing.
So it's been really lovely. Picked lots of positive reactions coming in, and I've got a new collaborator through it, really randomly through the whole thing. Congrats. So it could be really cool. So come and join that.
Amazing. Oh, that sounds fucking awesome. Brilliant work.
And then, but enough about me. Wait, what? No, it's not what. When? No, I got that wrong again. It's on the tip of my tongue. Oh, where? That's the one.
There we go.
That was
yes.
it.
I also shout what when, why, loudly into the sky. Where is What Am I Rolling, which is a twice monthly tabletop RPG one-shot podcast. As always, it is going very well.
Fantastic.
We've just finished our world-building series at time of recording. I've got another solo game coming out in a couple of weeks' time. We've had a couple of interviews. We've got loads of interviews coming up, actually, which is exciting. But hopefully we'll be getting on the home stretch for some actual plays. It's got the content. It's just now the laborious task of sitting down to editing. Like, I love editing. I just don't want to sit for 4 hours and do it.
It's the thing, isn't it? It's just, and it's finding the time to do it. It's the thing.
Exactly. So you can go check that out wherever you listen to podcasts as well. I also do Too Long Didn't Read Tabletop RPGs, in which I do a couple of streams a week on the YouTube channel for where we look at an RPG that has caught my interest, whether it's a quick start, whether it's a game that someone's recommended, and we go through like what we like about it, what, if anything, we can improve about it, and what, in terms of accessibility, could be changed about it, because a lot of these digital games are versions of physical games, which is all great and fun, but when we're reading it, we're like, oh, this would be nice if we had alt text. We talked about layout in this episode. Yeah. Would it be nice if we had the layout a little bit different and explained a little bit more? And it's been quite nice because I have had comments from the actual game designers. I try not to tag them because I don't want to be too critical about stuff, because I appreciate it's very difficult to create a game. But it's been interesting that they go, oh, the reason I did this was because of this. But if I kickstarted it again, I'd hopefully do this instead. And so that's been a really nice conversation, actually. Again, as I always say, it's not a criticism of their games, it's more of a critique about what I enjoy about games, and like how would I run it and what appeals to me. Because we've had a lot of games on I've got randomly, which I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'd ever play this game, but then I've read it through and gone, that sounds like an excellent game. So one we did recently was the D Sanctum, which is like Tudor witchfinders, but you have a little bit of magic, but you were sort of like put in jail, and now you're on like your last sort of request, etc., and you've been pulled out to help for Queen and country. So you have that horrible, again, political intrigue, but again using against your little bits of magic, but you're caught in a web, essentially. That sort of like, and I'm like, actually that does sound fun. Whereas before it was like Oliver Cromwell, that sort of thing. I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound fun. But yeah, turns out I'm all for Tudor witch hunters. Who knew?
I can see it.
Yeah, I guess because for me, I don't necessarily like historical games, because I wonder if there's a bit too much in terms of accuracy, perhaps. But then we did that one. We did Never Going Home, which was like a World War II Eldridge game, which was quite interesting. But yeah, like cool. I do enjoy going through them and looking at like the layout and stuff like. Cause sometimes I'm like, this is too small a font, I can't read it. Enhance. So yeah, so go check those out.
Yeah, one of the big things of that is that bare bones edition for Mort Borg just keeps coming back to me as like one of the best things I've seen and I think more companies should do that. Just do your lovely fancy graphics, but also make a simplified, none of the fun stuff, just the simple stuff.
Just have it all text. And even if you have like an image showing what the very cool mechanic is, which I'm all for. If it's not got alt text or you don't have it in text, no one can read it with a screen reader. And I know that sounds so silly, but like, who knows when my eyesight will go? Probably soon. It is fascinating because it makes me think about my own content as well, about how much I should be describing more.
Well, I was picked up on it on my competition, and I already had set up all the rules, but I hadn't actually put out the random rolling tables. But for the competition, there is a whole set on a Google Drive with all the rules written out in plain text and all the tables written out in plain text as well.
There you go. Accessibility, hooray!
Yeah, no, and it's really it's useful. It's useful for me now, but like it's also just like important to do. And I think I'm going to do the same for the Mortborg stuff as well now as well. Just set those up as simplified versions of the text, just basic plain text versions of the documents as well.
Like you said, it's not only because ultimately it's maybe not necessarily for the majority of your viewers or people that take part in the conversation, but the fact it's just there means that anyone who accesses it can get involved, and it's not that barrier for it. It's so simple. Anyway, we could have a whole episode about accessibility. We could talk about like, well, this is not accessible, that's not accessible, etc. But there you go. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you so much for listening. And
thank you, listeners. Thank you.
We will see you
on the flip side.
Ooh.
I have the octopus noise in.
Oh no.